Hello, my friends. This is Deepak Chopra, and I have the distinct pleasure of speaking to a friend of mine, Gerard Senehi. And I first got to know him through a network of conscious leaders, and he's also part of a group that I'm part of, Evolutionary Leaders. And Gerard and his wife are doing some amazing work in the area of education. But I met him when I first met him. It was at a session where he gave a performance in a way uh, to what he calls mentalism. What is that, Gerard? What do you do when you do all these amazing, what I will say, perceptual and cognitive revisions of reality?
I like that framing, cognitive revisions of reality. What I do, I guess what I do is disrupt people's sense of a solid reality. And I use the mystery arts to do that. Mentalism is one of the mystery arts. You have magic, mentalism, and it's a wonderful art form because unlike magic, people with magic, they can still maintain their idea of reality and say, okay, well, it's a trick. I know what it is, so I know reality. Whereas with mentalism, it's a little more, it has this, has a lot more inspirational potential because it can help us think beyond our preconceived ideas.
So, Gerard, this is a very important topic for me because, I come from this wisdom tradition, Vedanta, Kashmir Shaivism, and aspects of Buddhism, where actually the principle of reality is that everything that we perceive is actually a magical lie. So, what we call normal reality is perceptual experience, which actually takes us away from the truth. And in the wisdom traditions, they call it Maya, or the illusion. The goddess Maya creates the illusion of a physical world when in fact there is no physical world. And then it's the job of Durga to render the veil of ignorance and disrupt it, puncture it so we can see the real reality. So let me explain what I mean actually. Every perception is a magical lie because, first of all, it's species specific. What we perceive as humans is not what a bat experiences as the echo of ultrasound, or an insect with 100 eyes. What does it see when it looks across? Or a snake navigating through infrared. So, what we call physical reality is a species specific perceptual experience. And actually, we learn perception. When we are born, we just experience qualia, qualities of awareness, sounds, noises, colors, shapes, forms, sensations, images. But then soon we start to construct our reality. We call this an iPhone and this a hand and that the earth. But everything we are perceiving is a narrow band of perceptual activity in consciousness, which is species specific, and we are projecting it as the physical world, when in fact it's a reification or a construction, that which we call the physical world. Now, of course, this idea is also there in Western philosophy. Wittgenstein, our life is a dream. We are asleep, but once in a while we wake up enough to know that we're dreaming, because every experience right now that we're having is a lucid dream in a vivid now, but it's based on magical lies. After all, my perception tells me Earth is flat. Nobody believes that anymore. My perception tells me that this world is solid and my body is solid. I know it's proportionately as void as intergalactic space. If I could see it as it really is, I'd see a huge emptiness, a few scattered dots and spots, and random electrical discharges, which in turn are also made of emptiness. And of course, my sensations tell me the Earth is stationary. We know it's spinning at dizzying speeds and hurtling through space at thousands of miles an hour. So in my mind, as a mentalist, you don't take us away from reality. You just change one perceptual trick, which we call our collective hallucination that there's a physical world, into other kinds of perceptual experiences. And the deeper we go, the higher we fly. In a sense, we realize that everything we perceive is a learned phenomenon through sculpting our brains in a particular way through this hypnosis of social conditioning. So I think what you're doing is very valuable if you actually understand that we don't experience the physical world, we only experience species specific collective perceptions that we agree on. Any comment?
That's really beautiful. And I think when I first heard that uh, the perception of color is not the perception of an objective reality, it's a creation of our biology and so on, I had that kind of perspective that you share. And it's a very difficult perspective to get to. And I think the value of what you're saying is that I think we're constructing reality as best as we can. And I think the constructions are enormously valuable. You may call it an illusion or a dream, but it's also what allows us to interact, to heal our bodies with medicine and all of those things. And I think what is often missed is this greater, vast context that is informing this reality. And I think having access to the vastness and the unknown really allows us to bring more light to what we're experiencing as well, and make it and define it in deeper ways. So we're not just responding to the surface things, but we also can go more deeply into reality. So I really appreciate what you said. And you have an amazing way to bring it to life. I'm just like,
but I mean, these constructs that allow us, as you say, to navigate the human universe. I mean, we made up constructs like latitude, longitude, Greenwich Mean
yeah,
Time,
yeah,
money, Wall Street. All this
right.
is our construct. So what we experience as the universe is the human universe, conceived, constructed, governed, and coming into existence in human consciousness. And that's, if we begin to understand this, then we also realize how easy it is to puncture our notion of an objective reality. Today scientists are calling that naive realism, and questioning the existence of an objective world.
Yeah, and the constructs, that we create are scaffolding upon which society rests. So they're incredibly valuable. I mean, latitude and longitude, there are thousands of applications to that. And I think not holding them rigidly as if they're an objective final truth allows us to keep creating more useful, more constructs that maybe help us make a better society.
I agree. So with that, I'm very interested in the work you and your wife are doing in the field of education. Can you tell us a little bit about that work?
Yeah, so I guess tying it into what we were speaking about, part of the construct of education is really about the development of the individual, preparing students for college and career is like the big construct. And then there's this side construct, which is addressing the whole child. But the ways that we think about that construct is still, I find, often within a box, what that means. I think it's by making space for what that really does mean that we can uncover more about what that means. So what we've done is really dug into what does it mean to really support the development of the whole child? What does it mean to address character and really ultimately students' humanity? What does it mean to really engage their humanity? So we created a semester-long curriculum and trained teachers in public high schools to teach a class that I think ultimately prepare youth for uncovering who they are and what life is about and what is going to be their role in it in the future.
So what is this program called?
It's called the Question Project.
The Question Project.
Yeah.
Please tell me why you chose that name.
For one thing is because um, there was a sense that it addresses some of the most fundamental human questions. So, but I like to say that we don't ask questions that we don't ask leading questions, but we also don't ask questions that don't lead anywhere. So the idea behind the name is really not just to ask philosophical questions, like a philosophy class that aren't necessarily going to transform your life or really help you find out who you are. When I took philosophy in college, I was like, this has nothing to do with me. What about me? Um, so the questions are really designed to engage the students' intellect, the rigor of intellect, but also their experience, their humanity, and then they do it together. So they're really doing it in the context that it's not all about them, but it's about understanding life.
So, in a sense, reflective inquiry, is that what the process is?
Yeah, very much reflective. It allows students to really define their own answers. So rather than an educational model that gets students, has the information already in advance, and then gets students to come to that information, even if it's in self-learning ways. Here we're saying, no, it's really important to allow, in our case, it's high school students that we work with in public schools, to give them the space to really shape their own answers. And in that way, that's the ultimate agency. If you're responsible for how you define who you are and what life is about, you're giving students the ultimate agency. And we're mostly in schools in the highest poverty areas. And it's amazing when students feel that sense of, oh, I'm at the center of my own life. I went to a private school, but I didn't really feel at the center of my own life. I just felt like, okay, I'm supposed to do this and I'm supposed to do that. And I slowly climbed my way to like, who am I and what am I really about? It's really, that's a real hard journey because we don't have that support in education.
So, Gerard, we have a meditation practice that we use at the Chopra Foundation in our ecosystem that actually begins with 4 questions. Who am I? What do I want? What is my purpose? What am I grateful for? And of course, we don't ask people to come up with answers. We just say, live these questions, and then life will, strangely enough, move you into the answers through whatever synchronicity, insight, epiphany, or encounters. But if you're living the questions, life moves you into the answers. What are the results you're achieving with this methodology?
So we're right now, Stanford is doing an impact study. So I have they're in the middle of it. So I don't know like the formal results yet because we're still a young organization. But what I see in the classrooms, what I hear from teachers is a kind of ownership of students' own lives and their thinking process and authenticity and a sense of, we speak about self-esteem, as a word, but what does real self-esteem mean? It's when you're really dealing with the challenge of life, you're really creating a real foundation for who you are and what you're about. So I feel that when I go into the classroom, I hear the students speak. I'm odd because sometimes I go, even as a young man, I couldn't have the kind of conversations they're having. They tackle the complexity of life. And I had one student that said something amazing as an example of the impact. We went to California to one of our schools in LA and met with a few students, and we said, how's it going? How is the class going for you? And this one girl said, I had a major breakthrough. And so I was like, we were all really curious. So I asked her, I said, she didn't volunteer more. So I said, well, what was it? And she said, I realized that I'm completely confused about life. And I found that so inspiring that a student would feel inspired, would experience that as a breakthrough. that the disruption, that the space for her, and I asked her why, and then what she said is like, I realized I've been following a script and feeling like I should be doing, and something's not right in my life. And then she said, I'm only 16 years old. I'm not supposed to know what life is about. And it created all this room for her to discover and to explore and to really find out. So that space to me is precious. It's indicative of, kind of the space that's missing in society. We don't really have a lot of space. If you're a politician, you have to know. If you're a doctor, you have to know. If you're a teacher, you have to know. And if you're a student, you have to know. So that space to find out, the space for the unknown, the space for the mystery, the space to discover is so precious, and it has a profound impact on kids.
That's very beautifully said. There's, of course, Socrates said, the only thing I know is that I don't know. Rumi says in one of his poems, exchange your cleverness for bewilderment. And if you're not bewildered by life, then you're asleep. And in the Vedanta, we say when you admit not knowing, there's something called pure knowing, which means the right response comes to you in every situation as it happens, without anticipation, without regret, but fresh from the field of infinite possibilities, which you can only access through not knowing or through stillness or silence. Rumi, again, in one of his poems, says, God's language is silence, everything else is poor translation. So we, in fact, believe very strongly that not knowing is the source of intuition and insight and imagination and creativity and higher vision and transcendence, ultimately. How many schools are you involved with?
About 14 schools, so we're still a young organization. We have each year, I mean, barring COVID was a big. It was a big disruption. It's been this huge disruption in public schools, academically in all kinds of ways. But we've trained about, I don't know, maybe about 70 teachers to teach this class.
What's your vision that this system of education becomes mainstream? And because right
Yeah,
now
so
our system of education is just information overload. I can look up anything on Google. I don't need information overload. So what's your aspiration?
yeah, I think this addresses one area of education, right? So it's just a foundational area, because it's so important to go forward into the future with a sense of who we are and what we're about. If we don't have that going into the future, then what's informing us is, I think, will be a lot of other things. And I think our program is one powerful way of doing it. What I envision for the future is a new core subject, so that we treat this with the same importance as we do English, math, science, and that we have different programs, age-appropriate ways of really, I call this in the biggest sense, I don't call this a spiritual thing or a social emotional learning is kind of the formal category that it fits into, but I really see it as creating outlets for students' humanity, and if we, and that there's very concrete ways to do that. It sounds like a vague term, but we can really, like I saw a beautiful video of maybe preschoolers in a school it was in Arabic, so it must have been in the Middle East somewhere, where the teacher engages kids' humanity and also agency choice by, she has 3 things on the door, and the child can pick whether they want say hello as they come in, as a handshake, as a hug, or as a salutation, something like that. So they pick the one, and then that's what they get. And that's a beautiful kind of example of how you can create ways to engage students' humanity, and define that with rigor, because often when we think about, humanity or spirituality, it can be very vague on one hand, or it could be like overly concrete, where it just becomes about skills. And then you lose, the human dimension. You lose the human dimension if listening is just about a skill, for instance, or empathy becomes a skill. It's not the whole of the child.
What you're saying is actually, you said not necessarily spiritual, but it actually is. If by spirituality we mean self-awareness, that's what you're expanding, the awareness of the self and the potentialities of the self to carve out your personal reality and your destiny as well.
Yeah, and I like to call that a human endeavor, because when if I were to use the word spiritual, you might think, well, that applies to some people, but not to others, just like religion. Whereas this is really a human endeavor. We're all here. We all have to figure out our path forward. That is a human endeavor. And by calling it that, it's really our shared foundation. Spirituality may never become like a shared foundation as a label, but our humanity is a shared foundation. We really are one humanity, really.
That's beautiful. So before we leave, can you tell us how people can learn more about your project, and if you can leave us with a website that we can all share in our larger ecosystem?
Yeah, great. So for schools, the name of the project is the Question Project. And our organization and the website is openfutureinstitute.org. And they can contact us through the website. And one thing I would add to it is that when we think about social emotional learning and this kind of growth in students, is that a big part of it is also training teachers, bringing methodologies to teachers. Not, people often think about the growth of the teachers themselves, which is important. But I think if we focus on how to create that space for students, the growth of the teacher becomes a byproduct. And we can really also, because the challenge is, you can have a great curriculum, but how does a teacher create that right space for the students to really engage with it authentically?
You're doing great work, Gerard. Congratulations. And I hope more and more people find out about this work. Please check out the links and join this conversation, add to it, question yourself. An unexamined life is not worth living. That's what we heard, but we don't practice it. We become biological robots and algorithms instead of creative intelligence that we are the inheritors of as human beings. And if we don't harness our own self-awareness, then our humanity is incomplete. Thank you, Gerard, for joining this conversation, and more to come in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak, for your support. Thank you very much.